Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to the How Good Innovation Online series. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to our next hour of discussion. As a way of introducing one another, if our audience members would like to put their name and where they're based, if you'd like, you can put your role or your company where you work into the chat. We can get to know each other a little bit that way, even though we're not going to have time to formally introduce ourselves to one another. My name is Leah Wolf. I am currently in Los Angeles, California. I'm the head of regenerative education and content here at How Good. And I'm so excited to be speaking with our two panelists today. Joining us from Chipotle is the VP and head of supply chain, Carlos Londono, and Chris Oliviero, who is the general manager of Niman Ranch. And today we're going to be talking about supplier partnerships, what that means, why it's important for a more resilient supply system and a healthier planet. So just to run through a quick agenda for our time together today, we'll finish up our introduction. We'll have a 40 to 45-minute conversation with our panelists. And finally, we'll open it up for a Q&A with the speakers before we wrap up at the top of the hour. As we continue with our discussion today, I'd like to invite the audience to put any questions you might have for the speakers into the chat, and I will do my best to get to them and to relay them to our panel. I'm really looking forward to our next two sessions as well, so I'd like to draw your attention to those. The first is on March 3rd with Dorothy Shaver, who's the Global Marketing Sustainability Lead at Unilever, and Jay Watson, who is the Senior Manager of Global Impact Initiatives at General Mills, to share how their organizations are moving the needle toward regenerative sourcing strategy. And then on March 17th, we have Claire Oliverson, who is the head of marketing for Too Good To Go, and Madeline Rotman, who is the head of sustainability for Imperfect Foods, to talk about how food brands can use procurement as a tool to reduce food waste in the food system. And so I hope you can join us for one or all of the upcoming sessions. You can sign up for them on our website. And Kate, if you wouldn't mind putting the innovation series link into the chat so that everyone can sign up for those sessions, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop my screen share now, and I'd like to give the floor to our two speakers, Carlos and Christopher. And so if you guys wouldn't mind just doing a quick intro about yourselves, about kind of how you got to where you are today, and a little bit maybe about your sustainability journey on a personal level. Carlos, if you'd like to start, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm so excited to join this panel. It looks like we've got some really good people. I was just reading some names as everybody was dialing in. So I see even Paul Willis is still on the call. So wonderful to have all you guys. So a little bit about me. I'm head of supply chain for Chipotle Mexican Grill. I've been here about 4 years after we did our transition from Denver to Newport Beach. I've always been drawn to purpose-led organizations. It's such a wonderful environment here at Chipotle. As you guys know, we're all about cultivating a better world. And so therefore, sustainability is a big part of what we do. I'm an industrial engineer by training. I'm originally from Colombia, South America. And I've worked in the food industry essentially my entire life. A big portion of my career was at Starbucks, also a very purpose-driven organization. And so now at Chipotle, I have the privilege of establishing relationships with really great folks like Chris and Paul and a few others, and really help try to bring this purpose forward. So we spend a significant amount of time, resource, energy in sustainability efforts at Chipotle. It is an integral part of what we are and our DNA. And so therefore, we love participating in these types of events. So thank you very much for having me, and I'll hand it over to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Carlos, and Leah, thanks again for having us. So I'm Chris Oliviero. I'm the general manager of Niman Ranch. My sustainability journey began back in 2006. I was in business school, and they had an elective course you could take on sustainable business practices, which introduced me to triple bottom line thinking. And then coming out of business school, I was at Purdue, wrote a white paper, presented it to senior management there, and launched our environmental sustainability effort at Purdue. Been with Niman Ranch now for a number of years. I think for me with Niman Ranch, sustainable farming practices have been a key pillar for us, but I think the recognition that, in order to have the kinds of impact that we want to have, it begins with taking care of the farmers, right? And I think kind of tying back to that triple bottom line mentality, by taking care of farmers, providing a sustainable business model made possible with partners, like Chipotle, it puts farmers in a position where they can make the investments back into the land, back into the animals, and all of that then translates back into communities. So you can get into this virtuous cycle. And, so for us, that's, I think everybody who's working at Niman, one of our core passions, and why people want to work here and want to work with partners like Carlos and Chipotle, and why that relationship has lasted for 20 plus years at this point.
Wonderful. And do you mind, Chris, just quickly talking a little bit more about triple bottom line for people on the call who might not be familiar with that line of thinking?
Sure. I mean, the key is, a lot of kind of corporate philosophy was, all about maximizing shareholder value. And that was the sole focus. And, triple bottom line thinking is about the fact that it's about more than that. Profitability is important, right? Because you have to be profitable in order to make investments into the other bottom lines that matter around community and around the environment. So it's much more of a holistic way of thinking about business, beyond just this notion of short-term immediate shareholder value. I think there's lots of different ways that people talk about it, but it's more and more commonplace in corporate thinking today, and how companies talk about their vision for the future.
Sure. And I think thanks in part to organizations like Niman, sort of bolstering that type of thinking and talking about it in groups like this. So thank you very much. I'd love to hear a little bit about the way that, as you mentioned, Chipotle and Niman have been working together for 20 plus years. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from both of you about the way that you've built that relationship, because I think it's something that's very unique. And so maybe from the Chipotle perspective and the Niman Ranch perspective, how that relationship has sort of evolved and the way that you've invested in it over the years. Carlos, if you'd like to start.
Sure, absolutely. I'll start. So, as you guys may be aware, our founder, Steve Els, always had this idea of building a better world, cultivating a better world. And so he wanted to start this concept of food with integrity. So in other words, how do we do well, but do good at the same time, which is exactly what Chris was referring to earlier with the concept of the triple bottom line. And so he started looking for, the best possible practices around people, around animal welfare, around the environment. And so he found this relationship with Niman Ranch. And so what he wanted to do is try to advocate for the best possible conditions for the animal and for the environment, and try to figure out a way to make it, of course, business friendly and feasible, but at the same time, make sure that we were doing the right thing for farmers and for really everybody in the supply chain. So that's how it came to be. It started initially as a relatively small endeavor, and then with time, it started growing to the great relationship that it is today. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add some to that.
Yeah, sure. A couple comments. I think 20 years is certainly, a very long time, to be working together in the way that both companies have. And, I think it starts with, having truly aligned values, that are more than just words. I think it's also about the consistency with which, over a 20-year period, there have been lots of opportunities for either company to decide, I'm in a very challenging business environment. I need to start making some compromises on some of the key elements that our respective brands stand for. And I think what's been critically important is that, regardless of the challenges faced, by Niman and certainly by Chipotle, during those periods of difficulty, there hasn't been a compromise on those values. And I know that's important for us in terms of the relationship that we have with Chipotle. And, I know with Chipotle, it's important. I mean, they've had some changes in leadership, and I met Brian Nickel for the first time a couple of years ago, and he was talking about why, Niman Ranch has been an important partner for Chipotle, and he referenced the fact that they like and want to work with companies that are willing to say the hard no versus the easy yes. And so I think that's been foundational in all of this. And I mean, we have Paul Willis on the phone, who is, for those of you who don't know, Paul founded our pork program in 1995. So he is what we call hog farmer number one. It was his idea. He built it. He scaled it, with the support of Steve and the Chipotle team. And, when both companies were smaller and Chipotle would open a new location, we would have Paul or another farmer actually on site at the restaurant opening, as an example of kinds of the unique things that were done and were very possible and easier to do, certainly pre-COVID, but also, when we were both earlier on in our journeys.
Thank you so much. Carlos, I'd love to hear a little bit, as Chris is talking about the relationship with farmers that Chipotle has and how important that is, maybe a little bit about how you foster engagement between the executive team, decision makers on the corporate side of things, and the farms to ensure that corporate decision making is really meaningfully embedded in your supply system.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah. And that's such a key thing. We at Chipotle are very concerned about the farming community. And I don't know if you guys know this, but the average farmer in the US is 58 years old. I remember growing up in Latin America, all farmers were young people, right? Like in their 20s or their 30s and so on. And so as farming has evolved in the US, we've inevitably aged farmers out. It has been incredibly difficult for farmers to have access to land, to have access to resource, to have access to modern day education. And so we spend a significant amount of time and effort making sure that all of those things are resolved and that we're able to directly contribute to everything that we do. So, a lot of people find this funny, but I take my, I take my entire executive team on farm visits frequently, right? So Chris was laughing the other day because there's a picture of Brian Nickel, our CEO, with a baby pig, like 1 day old, holding it. He's just ecstatic looking at this baby pig. And it's because I take them to all the farms, right? So they go to our beef farms, they go to our chicken farms, they go to certainly to our pork farms. We really go everywhere, and our leaders are very, very much engaged in everything that happens in the farming community. We have a very special program where we sponsor young farmers. So we give them scholarships, we give them grants, we give them access to funds so that they can start their operations. So very, very much involved, but it's something that, as Chris was mentioning earlier, requires just a lot of attention, especially from the executive circle, just to make sure that the right amount of energy and effort is applied in this space. So we're incredibly proud of that. We've had great success through the years with these things. We now have farmers that are applying incredible technologies and incredible techniques, modern day developments, if you will, to farming operations that have been relatively stagnant for a few years. So we're particularly proud of being able to participate and sponsor many of these activities.
And
Thank
Carlos,
you so much.
It's interesting too, because you talk about, the executive team visiting farms. And if you go back to the beginning, with Niman, Steve, I mean, he initially, read an article in the magazine, The Art of Eating, on the lost taste of pork. And it talked about, how the rise of CAFOs and whatnot had really created an environment where the other white meat was actually how pork was presented. And it didn't fit with his vision of, what he thought food should be, and what food, I think at that point, I would say actually could be, because there weren't a lot of options out there. And, but what's interesting is, just like your team today, goes out to visit the farms, the relationship with Niman started with Steve going out to visit Paul at the farm and actually see for himself, how different this model was. Because, it's easy to talk about an idea, but I think, Chipotle was in a period of scaling and growth and vision, and needed to make sure that that they could match the vision with what was available. But that kind of in person. I mean, I remember the visit with your entire team, going out to Ron Martison's farm, and doing the farm tour and sitting on the porch and listening to some of the young farmers that we had there, and kind of what that's led to just in the last couple of years of a 20-year relationship is remarkable, and I think a testament to how the attention to detail that you all place in being directly engaged with what matters and delivering on food with integrity.
It's so wonderful to hear. And a little bit of my background is that I worked as a whole animal butcher in New York City for 6 years. And so we would take trips up to the farms in upstate New York in order to kind of connect with the farmers and get a better idea of what regenerative agriculture and what sustainable agriculture, humanely raised animals really meant in practice. And it's so critical to the way that you interact with your, daily 40-hour-a-week role. To have that tangible experience is amazing, and to see it on a scale of, with decision makers who are really have the power to affect our food system is really inspiring. I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe the role you mentioned, the aging farmer population. I think you touched a little bit on this as well, but we're sort of seeing the repercussions of agricultural infrastructure sort of degrading over the last century. And I think that that's very obvious when it comes to mid-sized meat processing facilities, but across the agricultural sector, we're seeing that. And so I'd like to hear a little bit from both of you about the role that you see private companies playing in sort of rebuilding the food supply system infrastructure that has been eroded over the last several decades. Carlos, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Really great point, Leah. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's definitely a huge source of concern. I remember when I was young and when I was in college, we always kept talking about all this great automation that was going to come in the future, right? And I'm telling you, this is like 20 something years ago, like a lot into the 20 something years. That's how old I am. But it's really interesting because everybody said, oh, in the future, like farming operations, for example, they'll all be done by robots, right? And people are not going to do this and this and that and the other. So I remember there was all this anxiety back then. Oh God, the work of farmers is going to be replaced by robots. So here we are, 20 something years later, and that's still not the case, right? As a matter of fact, it's actually worse, right? Because our farmers don't even have access to some of the technology that is currently available. And so of course, the issue of concern, right? Now, inevitably, if you look at it kind of from two ways, right? If you look at it from the human aspect, very concerning, right? Like you absolutely need to make sure that people have the right tools and equipment and the right knowledge and know-how to be able to do their jobs, number one. But from a business perspective, it also doesn't make sense, right? You need efficiency. You need to be able to do things relatively quickly, but do them in a way that are also conducive to good environmental practices, right? You can't just go and destroy resources in order to be able to do a particular thing. So you have to be smart about the way that you plant and the way that you use technology. Now, with that said, we're concerned that if you don't apply enough resources to the infrastructure, then inevitably you end up paying for it later, right? So you at some point have to make a significant recovery effort, and that involves capital and expense and a variety of other things. And so very concerned. That's why we spend a lot of time trying to figure this out with farmers. We actually have invested in some technology companies that are helping us with automation, with robotics, and a variety of other things, because we believe in enhancing the experience of the farmers through technology. So in other words, if there are ways for them to do their jobs more effectively, more efficiently, and also be able to make a better living, we're all for it. That, of course, has to be framed in the construct of being sustainable and making sure that we're not inadvertently causing another problem by introducing technology or things of that nature. Now, one of the programs that we're particularly proud of is a program that we call Local Farmers. And so our Local Farmer program, the idea is to try to bring produce and a variety of other things as close to the restaurant as possible so that we reduce our environmental impact on logistics and transportation and carbon footprint and all of those things. Now, inevitably what happens is we have hundreds, thousands of small local farms. And for a company like ours, it's tricky. It's very tricky to manage all of those different entities. And so that's where we believe technology plays an important role. Like, how do we keep everybody connected so that we are, first of all, guaranteeing food safety, that is incredibly important for us, but also making sure that the right type of capital is reaching those communities that are helping us with our local program, produce program. So that in a nutshell is more or less the way that we think about technology, right? Very important for us to use technology appropriately so that we can improve the infrastructure.
Yeah, and obviously we at How Good are very excited about leveraging data to support farmer livelihoods and foster a more sustainable food system. Chris, I'd love to hear from you next, just to kind of give you a reminder of the question, kind of the role that private companies are playing in rebuilding food supply system infrastructure and what you think they should be doing.
Yeah, so a couple comments. I mean, first off, Carlos touched on it. We do have a looming crisis in terms of the age of farmers. 59. We have a crisis in terms of the number of farmers. We've been losing about 34 farms per day, going back over the last 10 years. And we have a crisis in consolidation, right? And I mean, if you take hog farming in Iowa since 1992, the number of hogs is up 50%. Has increased by 50%. The number of farmers raising hogs in the state of Iowa has declined by 80%. So I think a very big role, an important role for private companies to play, first off, is to create markets where small independent farmers can once again have a role, right? Can have a voice, can have a market. Farmers markets are great, right? In terms of the rise of farmers markets nationally is a really important development, but it's hard to scale a farmers market. And in our business, and the farmers who we work with, they're raising animals. So we use the analogy for people who don't think about this all the time. The farmer, if they're going to sell it, or in our case, when we buy the car, we have to sell all of the parts. And we have to get a good value for that. And that's really hard to do on a hog or on a head of cattle. So I think the most important role we can play is, we have the opportunity to work across channels. We can work with Chipotle, to move, certain portions, move the picnics and the butts and some of the ham muscles. We can work with retail to move, ribs and loins and chops. And so, we can create a market that allows smaller farmers to once again, step back in and participate. And I think that's critically important. I mean, if you just think about those couple of trends that Carlos mentioned and I built on, if we don't do something, the relentless push over the last 20 years, efficiency at the cost of everything else, just in time, every piece of equipment running at maximum efficiency. We saw during COVID what happened when there was a small disruption there. We saw empty shelves. We saw animals being backed up and not able to be processed. We saw markets collapsing for farmers and ranchers, and just really a devastating scenario that was, for the first time in many years on the nightly news at a time where people were home and able to hear the message. And I think for the first time in a while, there's a much broader understanding of, some of the downside to what's happened over the past, 20, 30, 40 years.
Sure. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you've touched on, how difficult the last couple of years have been for suppliers and, also for brands. And I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe some of the unique ways that your long-term partnership has allowed you both to support each other over the years. Carlos, if you'd like to start.
Sure, Leah. And it's interesting. We jokingly say that the one positive thing of coronavirus was that supply chain people all of a sudden became cool people, right? So, one of the cool kids. But it's because there was so much duress around everything related to supply chain. But In all honesty, I've been in supply chain 20 plus years. The last 2.5 years have been the hardest of my life by far, right? And believe it or not, Chipotle actually did not have any disruptions, like none, right? We had very, very minor things, right? I mean, we had competitors that, there was a very famous hamburger place that ran out of hamburgers, right? We had a very famous taco place that ran out of tacos, right? And taco shells, they were all over the news. But we did not, thank goodness, right? But it was not an accident. It was because of relationships like what we had with Niman Ranch. I often quote this to my partners. I say, listen, partnerships, you see the value of a partnership when you get yourself into a situation, right? When everything's hunky-dory and things is just rolling along, partnerships are great. But really when push comes to shove is really when you see the value of the partnerships, right? And so, of course, we were in a situation where everything was being challenged. And it was because of these partnerships that we were able to stay afloat. I mean, we cannot tell you how many calls I had with folks saying, hey, listen, we really need to stay in stock right now. We really need you guys to help us in a particular situation. Obviously, everything within the construct of doing the right thing for us and for our partners. And so because of this, Leah, we were able to deliver incredible growth for partners in the worst time of some of the worst time of the economy, right? So many of our partners call me now and they say, oh my God, thank goodness for Chipotle. Thank goodness that you guys stuck around with us during this difficult situation. So I'd like to cite an example. So when the virus first started in March of 2020, the milk industry, right, the dairy industry was under tremendous stress, as you guys remember. So farmers were throwing milk out left and right, and many of these farmers were losing their livelihood. And one of these big cooperatives that we work with, they called us and they said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And I said, "No problem. We are going to take the brunt of it ourselves at Chipotle, right?" And so we decided to think about this as an investment, but we took a massive financial hit in order to keep all of these people in business. And we did that for a very, very protracted period of time. Now, our program is very, very highly specialized in dairy, right? The Food with Integrity program has so many conditions. And so therefore, in order for farmers to meet our requirements, they actually have to have a lot in place, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of technology, a lot of oversight, and so on. And so, of course, we see it as an investment in them and making sure that they're able to grow with us. Now, temporarily, it was a financial hit, of course, right? But very quickly, we were able to recover and we were able to grow double digit for the last 2.5 years as well. So this is the way, and I think Chris alluded to it earlier, right? It's a way to think about it more as an investment in the future, and not like the financial hit at that moment, right? And if you think of the financial hit at that moment, you will actually cause a problem for the long term and for the future, right? So I think it's because of these relationships that we've been able to be so successful in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful to hear about, an organization who recognizes that they have the ability, but more importantly, the willingness to absorb those kinds of financial blows that farmers absolutely cannot weather. And that, that we are seeing that that's what's leading to the consolidation and the loss of farmers across the United States. Is this inability to, they're highly leveraged and they are not able to kind of take on the negative effects of the supply system fragility that we've seen, and these deep supplier partnerships creating a much more resilient supply system for Chipotle is it's wonderful to hear that is beyond just like an inspiring story, really a business case, right? So I'd like to talk a little bit more about supply system resiliency in terms of maintaining quality and sustainable or regenerative integrity at scale. So Chris, earlier you mentioned consistency as being really important. And I think you've talked a little bit as well about the connection between taste and on-farm practices and how you're able to, I think a lot of people, especially at large food brands, whether it's a CPG or a restaurant, who are interested in sustainability, but ultimately think it's just not scalable, would be interested in hearing the way that you kind of tackle that problem, which I know is a really big question. But maybe Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about maintaining integrity and sustainability at scale. and how Niman approaches that.
Yeah, so a couple key points. I think first off, it requires, patience and commitment. I mean, you go back to the beginning. I mean, what Paul had was an idea, whether or not it would survive, and survive first contact was uncertain. Whether it would survive that jump from small and niche to medium. I mean, that's always one of the greatest areas of risk for any idea is, this idea that works is in a very small form where you can keep your arms around every piece of it, and suddenly you have to migrate into something that's scaled at a level that you don't have as much direct control. That's the area of greatest risk, in terms of those early years. And, so I think it's about a couple of things. One, it's really important. Everybody, talks the word partner on a regular basis. You hear that word thrown around in business all the time. And, I can tell you at Niman, we kind of break apart our business portfolio into partners and customers. And, I think making sure that there is a really strong emphasis on finding partners is going to be critical to something being scalable, and also critical to be willing to make the investments in relationships with other new ideas, right? Who's the next Chipotle? If you're there in the beginning, the staying power of those relationships, if you have shared values, is much stronger, than if you try to come in 20 years into it when heck everybody wants to have a piece of it. So that willingness, to take on some burden early with a recognition that you think there's good alignment and the belief that it will turn into something larger, for both parties, I think has been a really critical success factor for us. My predecessors are the ones who did a lot of that, whether it was Steve at Chipotle or Paul on the Niman side. And I think in terms of, the other piece is you have to be patient. And a lot of companies want to grow just for the sake of growing, right? And the size of, I would say most kind of markets that are focused on regenerative, there's a price value balance that you can't exceed. So I think for Niman, the fact that we haven't chased growth just for the sake of growing, but have really tried to match our growth with our ability to find, farmers and ranchers who fit within, the protocols that we require and that our partners expect, has been critical. And also we haven't put ourselves in a position where we've been so oversupplied, because we tried to grow too fast and outstripped our network of partners, or compromised on the protocols of our, coming from our farmers and ranchers, that we ended up doing damage to the business. And again, that's been, so I always talk about in our business, steady pressure is key, right? So understand what you want to achieve, apply steady, consistent pressure, and then look for those opportunities that may present themselves, where you can take maybe a bigger leap, but don't get greedy and don't compromise on what got you to where you are today. I'm very mindful today of what it took to get here, of the fact that, Niman Ranch is here today was not a foregone conclusion in 1995 when Paul launched it. It was not a guarantee in 2007. And, the folks like myself who've come in recent years, or, Brian and kind of and Carlos and the new leadership team at Chipotle, don't forget what it took to get here and squander that, for some short-term gain, because you'll never get it back. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much. Carlos, do you want to talk a little bit about Chipotle's perspective on maintaining quality and sustainable integrity at scale? I know you just opened your 3,000th restaurant, so congratulations.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we had a wonderful milestone yesterday. We opened our 3,000th restaurant, so very excited about that. And of course, scale is very important. So Chris was right on. So we sell 12 million pounds of pork in a restaurant a year, 12 million pounds. That's a lot of pork. And so, of course, we have to maintain all of these things that we just described: safety, quality, integrity, all of these things have to be maintained. And so doing it at that scale requires a different type of skill set. And so therefore, it becomes very important for us to just make sure that we understand who are the partners that are able to scale with us. And so, as Chris mentioned, when you're doing it in a controlled environment, it's really not a problem. But as you start adding more and more and more restaurants to the mix, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So the general rule of thumb that they used to use back in the day when they opened a restaurant for Chipotle is that a restaurant needed more or less one pork farm, right? More or less, right? Back then, because the restaurants were small and so on. Now, with 12 million pounds, you need more than a few farms, right? And so now all of a sudden it becomes a very complex and complicated process, right? And so that's why you need folks like partners at Niman Ranch to be able to keep this straight with us. So we at Chipotle, we're really, really good at making amazing food. We don't like to run farms, right? That's why we have Chris and his team, doing all that great work with us with the farmers and the animals and so on. But inevitably, you have to build that partnership and make sure that we're all in it together. Now, safety goes from the farm all the way to the restaurant, food safety especially, right? And so it requires traceability and technology and a variety of other things just to make sure that you never lose control of the supply chain and that you can guarantee that things are not only completely safe for the consumer, but also delicious, right? And so that nothing inadvertently went and lost its taste or it lost its profile or something like that. And I'll share an interesting story. I was talking to Steve Ells a few weeks into my joining Chipotle, and he said, "Hey, Carlos, let me tell you a story, right?" So one day we were sitting at the table with a supplier developing a product, right? And they said, "Well, Steve, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this other thing." And then Steve looked at the gentleman that was leading that organization and said, "Hey, tell me something. When you were young, right, how did your grandmother used to do this?" And she said, "Oh, really simple. You just take these 5 ingredients and just mix them together and, that's it. It's done, right?" And so Steve said, "That's what I want," right? And so then, of course, these guys in this company were like, "Oh, man, when you're doing it at your house, it's very simple, right? But when you're doing it for 3,000 restaurants, completely different situation." But they said, "You know what? We'll take the challenge, right? We'll take the challenge. We'll go back and we'll figure out what we can do." So what did that mean? It meant that you had to take out preservatives and conservation agents and additives and a variety of different things, right? And in order to take those things away from the product, it required incredible effort, right? So while it may sound really simple, right, that you're just going to do it at home very quickly and move it to the restaurants, when you're scaling up, then it becomes incredibly complicated and requires a lot of effort and technology and so on. So, but that's the kind of mentality that we advocate at Chipotle. Like, how do we take traditional, really wonderful culinary techniques and apply them in such a way that you conserve the integrity of the food, but you're also able to scale up and serve an incredible experience that is consistent throughout the country.
Thank you so much. I think next I'd like to talk a little bit about, the way that Chipotle has educated its consumers about the sustainability of its operation and its responsibly sourced meat. And, because I think these are all things that can go on behind the scenes, and it's wonderful and certainly the most important first step. But then I think Chipotle has done a really good job of, telling that story to its customers and telling the story of the farmers and telling the story of Niman Ranch and Paul Willis and all this. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, how you have gone about making that happen, making that communication and storytelling happen.
Is this one for Chris or for me?
Sorry, for you, Carlos. Yeah,
Okay,
at Chipotle.
wonderful. Yeah, so we are incredibly proud of all these amazing things that our partners do, right? And we love talking about it too. We love storytelling and we love to bring these things to market. So you guys have probably seen that we've been on television a lot. We actually made a second movie explaining essentially the essence of what it is that we try to do. And so we try to celebrate all these great things that our partners are doing. So every time, it's actually very enriching for me as a person, right? Every time that I'm meeting with a supplier, they tell us about all these wonderful advances that they've made in environmental conservation. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was with one of our cheese manufacturers, and they were explaining how it took them like about 7 years to build this really incredible water conservation infrastructure in their factory, and how they've been able to reduce their water usage and help their community and reduce pollution and all of these wonderful things, right? So we love to talk about those things. We love to talk about it with the partners. Sometimes the partners do them because they know that is the right thing, but we, of course, are in this business because of those types of things, right? And so we love talking about them. We love celebrating with those guys. And this is actually one of the things that we like the most about How Good. How Good is actually very good at helping us understand how it is that we're causing this impact, right? And so every time that we include a new supplier in the mix, or that we bring in a new technology or what have you, it's important to be able to talk about it. And so, sometimes when I meet people and they know that I work for Chipotle, they ask me, "Oh, really? Oh, Chipotle? No, great. You guys make the burritos, right?" And then I start talking to them about food with integrity, right? And they're like, "Wait, what? You guys do what?" And so I tell them, "Listen, we don't allow antibiotics. We don't allow growth hormones. We don't allow beta agonists." And they're like, "Really? I never knew," right? And so sometimes we do things because we know that they're the right things to do, but it's very difficult to be able to tell the story in a way that everybody understands it, right? Because you go into a restaurant, hey, listen, you're in a rush, you're gonna get your lunch and then go back to the office for a meeting. A lot of people don't necessarily take the time to really understand what's going on and so on. So in the manner that we're able to tell the story more clearly, then it becomes even greater value for our consumers and for the folks that love Chipotle. So these days, a huge part of our business has become digital, right? And it has become our app. And so one of the wonderful things about the work that How Good has done is in the app, as you're ordering your burrito, you will immediately see the impact that your order had on the environment, on animals, on farms, and so on. And it becomes very clear, right? And so that's our way to more clearly be able to communicate these stories and to reach a greater number of people. So actually, thank you guys at How Good for helping us reach that level of communication.
Yeah, and I have had the Chipotle app on my phone. I'm from the Denver area, so I've been to been going to the original location since I was in high school, and to have the app on my phone, I was so excited when I had the app on my phone before I even started at How Good, and so I was very excited to see that the consumer can really tangibly see their impact and influence their future purchasing decisions. And Chipotle being a messenger for farmers, I think that farmers and producers really need these champions in the public space in order to really talk about all the hard work that they're doing, because it's really, really tough, and it's year round and no vacations, and they certainly don't have their own marketing teams. And so that kind of leads me to my next question, which is for Chris. You've touched a little bit on the whole animal model that Niman has, and you guys do things very differently than many pork producers. I wonder if you could dig in a little bit on what it means to have the whole animal model, not just in terms of being less wasteful and using every part of the animal to the best of your ability and getting creative, and also having partners who are willing to get creative with you. So if you could just talk about maybe what are some of the other benefits of the whole animal model, and how that's different from other producers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, let's not forget Niman was started by a farmer, right? But by Paul on the pork side, and so I think it starts with, first and foremost, it's the right way to do business with a farmer. And look, any farmer who's raising an animal, somebody is buying that animal. The question is the model that's being used in terms of how they're compensated, does that properly incent them to stay in the business? Does that make sure that they can count on whatever they grow is going to be picked up, that the price that they'll be paid is fair, that it'll cover their input costs? A lot of the systems that are out there today pay farmers based on a commodity market. And in my time in in kind of the animal protein space, the number of times that I've seen inversions where, you know, what farmers are being paid is less than what it costs them to raise the animals, you know, is one of the reasons that we have a crisis. You know, if you're sitting there in your 20s, your 30s, or whatever age, and you're saying, I've got a lot of different things I can do with my life. Do I want to get into farming? Well, the question first off is going to be, how much can I count on, you know, being properly compensated for my time and effort, and make sure that I'm going to be able to stay in business? And that quite frankly just hasn't been the case. That's the reason, you know, 34 farms a day are vanishing. And so, you know, with our business model, you know, we pay farmers a premium, you know, based on their primary input, which is grain. So we make sure that whatever grain does, we keep them whole. And, you know, that knowledge is something that, you know, provides them with the confidence to be able to scale, provides them with the confidence to be able to get, you know, loans from banks, you know, where needed for growing. You know, the other piece that I think is really important is, you know, the traditional system for raising hogs today, to put up a new confinement barn, you're looking at $950,000 or more on top of the cost of the land. You know, with Niman, I mean, our model is designed to support diversified farming operations. And so you can scale your farm in increments of, you know, 300 to 500 hogs at a time, putting up a hoop barn. So instead of spending $950,000, you know, $30,000 to $40,000, you know, to put up a new hoop barn. You know, so again, that's a pretty important difference. And then, you know, our role is again, we talked about it earlier. You know, I mean, Carlos does not need every part of an animal. He just doesn't, whether we're talking beef, chicken, pork. But what we're able to do is work across channels, work across partners, and find a home that allows us to really, you know, generate the value that we need on the entire animal, so that the model that the farmers count on is one that you know, that we won't, that there's no risk to it being compromised. And again, that's where these partnerships, like what we're here talking about today, are so important.
Yeah, we used to joke around at the butcher shop where I used to work that the best thing we ever did was open a burger joint, just because we were a whole animal operation, and people love filet and they love ribeyes, but there's about 900 pounds of beef left over once you've used those cuts. So, you know, it's cool to hear about the way that this works on such a bigger scale. I have a question in the chat from Kai, so thank you, and everyone else, feel free to pop your questions in there. This one's directed to Carlos at Chipotle. So Kai is interested in I think it's worded very well. So given suppliers' varying use of technology, diverse types of operations for products other than pork, like I think produce is a particularly interesting part of the question. What practices have you found work for encouraging sustainable practices among other suppliers where you maybe don't have a relationship that's as deep as the one that you have with Niman? And is that something that you find is a challenge, or are people really eager to get on board?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. So believe it or not, a big part of what the supply chain leadership team does at Chipotle is actually to share best practices across platforms. And so sometimes, you know, we'll go and we'll visit a variety of different suppliers in multiple industries, right? Whether it's meat, dairy, or produce, or whatever it might be. And so it's interesting because sometimes I tell people, I joke around that I say that if I could take all my suppliers and put it into one supplier, that would be the perfect supplier, meaning all of them do things really, really well, right? But there are certain things that maybe they don't do as well. And so sometimes you just go between one place and the other, and you'll see that this one particular operation is doing an amazing thing, just absolutely incredible, great advance in technology and so on. And then literally you drive across to the other location and it is completely different, right? And they don't have access to that and stuff like that. And more often than not, it's actually not a big capital investment or anything like that. It's just that they don't know, right? And especially across industry. So sometimes the produce industry would have done an incredible thing at water management, and then you go over to dairy and they have absolutely no idea, right? Because it becomes very difficult. And so to us, that's actually something really interesting, because even though today we're in the era of super information where everyone has everything, at their fingerprints on their phone. Like you can just look at it, anything at any given moment and find out for free. It's still not the case. How interesting, no? And so a lot of what we do is actually share a lot of those best practices. So we'll go and we'll visit a particular supplier. We have auditors and we have people that specialize in these areas. And we'll say, hey guys, here's, for example, an idea of how to help you with water conservation, or here's an idea to help you with managing waste or managing garbage or things along those lines. And everybody's always 100% open, right? And so that's one of the things that we advocate for, a lot of the knowledge sharing and so on. Now, we have to be careful because some of those things are sometimes intellectual property. So you don't necessarily want to be sharing things that you're not supposed to be sharing. But the vast majority of the time, they're general practices that are just widely known and widely accepted. It's just that for whatever reason, that particular operation hasn't come around to doing it quite yet. So yeah, definitely very important. And it makes you wonder, right? Like, how could you get even more transparent with information so that you can give people the things that they need in order to make them more successful?
Thank you. And thank you for the question, Kai. I'd like to direct this next question to Chris. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way that you and Niman are involved in this kind of knowledge sharing and community, agricultural community knowledge building. I know that that many farming communities, ranchers, producers, especially if they're starting out young, really rely on the collective knowledge of the farming community in order to kind of troubleshoot and develop their best practices. And so is that something that Niman is involved with? And maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, happy to do that. And I think there's a couple of different ways to go about it. One are the kind of advocacy and support groups that are out there that are focused on areas that we're focused on, practical farmers of Iowa, and organizations like that, National Young Farmers Coalition. And so looking for synergies with them, to where we can provide direct support for what they're trying to do. Where we can provide funding, where we can, just participate in conversation. But, at Niman, we have a network of 750 independent family farmers and ranchers that make up our community. So we have a tremendous opportunity and wealth of knowledge just within our existing network. And so a couple things that we do, just from a knowledge sharing standpoint, we do a monthly newsletter. That's great. But we have two separate annual events, for our farmers to get together. So we have an event in Ames, Iowa in March, and we have another event in Des Moines called the Hart Farmer Appreciation Dinner in September. And, so that's, we'll have several hundred, farmers come together at both of those events. And while I'm sure they're desperate to hear me talk, while they're there, they really want to spend their time really talking about the different challenges they're facing. If they're having a tail biting issue on the farm, the conversation with the other farmers on what they're seeing. What are they trying for feed additives? What are they trying from a segregation perspective? Those are really important. Turn it into a trade show, so we have different vendors come in so they can talk to different folks, but providing that opportunity is really important. The other piece, COVID presented a really unique opportunity. Right, travel was cut way back, even with our field agents, and so we put in place a monthly Zoom call with farmers. And, that's just another forum for them to get together, ask questions, raise concerns. And that's every month. So I think it's really about regular communication, regular outreach. I think a mix of providing opportunities to get together in person. And then given the restrictions with COVID over the last few years, being creative and finding new ways to increase opportunities to share information and create dialogue has been key.
Yeah, thank you. So we're getting into the last 5 minutes of our call. And I'd love to give you both the opportunity to just kind of wrap up and talk a little bit about something that you're excited about, that it's upcoming for your organization or you personally, and just kind of, yeah, close out our time together. Carlos, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So first of all, Leah, thank you so much again for setting this up. It's always great to share ideas with like-minded people. Really excited. We at Chipotle, as I said earlier, we're cultivating a better world. We're just thrilled to be able to do this. We have very ambitious plans to continue to grow up to 7,000 restaurants here in the next few years. And we want to do it exactly as we described today, right? Making sure that we're doing it in a sustainable way, that we're celebrating partnerships like what we have with Chris and Niman Ranch, and that we're elevating the different constituents in our supply chain, but especially farmers. And so that's one of the things that makes me very proud to be part of Chipotle. And that's one of the things that we'll continue to do as we grow nationally as well as internationally. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, and again, just thank you for for having us and for everybody for joining today. It's been a great conversation. I'd come back to one of the earlier points I made, which I think for all of us in organizations that aren't just getting started but have been around, and again, we're whether or not they would be in existence 10, 20, 30 years from now, was a question. Is don't forget what it took to get to where you are. Don't forget the values that that have driven the equity that your brand, in terms of what it stands for, because you can make one small compromise and then that leads to one more, and before you know it, you've lost your way. And for us, partners of 20 years would say, it's not the company that we initially signed up with. The other piece, for us is we're committed to measured growth moving forward, right? So we're not going to change that. Our system it's not simple to scale, right? We can't just go, work with somebody and have them put up a new barn, and that barn generates 5,000 more pigs a year, which is kind of the conventional system. It takes a lot of effort. To recruit new farmers, and we have to do everything in our power to keep the farmers that we have today. And in this highly inflationary environment, that's meant taking a hard look at farmer pay, beyond just the grain cost. And then I think the last piece, if there's one thing COVID has shown us, is COVID has really tested old and longstanding quote partnerships. I think it's been really good for the last 2 years to force conversations, to really understand the folks that you think are partners in either direction. Is that in fact the case? And it's also forced everybody to be open to looking at and identifying new partners. And businesses that remain static tend not to be around in the next 10 or 20 years. So I think the way in which Chipotle has responded to COVID, and certainly the way in which I feel that our organization has, I feel really good about having turned a very difficult time into something that's laid a great foundation for the future.
Wow, thank you so much. What a wonderful way to sign off. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. Your work and at your organizations is very inspiring to me on a personal level, but I know that for a lot of people on this call, it is the same. And I know you're very busy. So thank you for taking the time to engage with us. Thank you to the audience for taking the time out of your Thursday to join and be a part of this community and learning and hearing from industry leaders. I look forward to seeing you all at the next session and all the sessions in this series about moving toward regenerative procurement. So with that, I will say, see you next time, and thank you so much.